And we're going. Okay. So, hello, I'm live streaming. I've live streamed a few times before. This is basically the second research live stream of mythology that I've done, but it's about time I did it again. Today I'd like to work on, as you can see, mapping out the four winds, or directions, or pillars. There's many names for them across the globe. I have a table here that I prepared to kind of take these names, put them on the map, show you how I kind of do this stuff. I'm preparing for a video on them. So I'm also available to take any kind of questions about any of my other videos or anything mythology or comparative. I'm just available here while I research for a couple of hours to hang out, basically. So hopefully everything in the stream is going correct. I'm using Streamlabs. I haven't used it before. It has a bit more perks, still trying to figure out how it works and all that. So if anyone's having any issues with audio or stuttering or anything, please mention it in the chat and I can try to work through that. So yeah, making sure everything's working over here. Seems fine. Okay. So, just for a general overview, if you have any questions in general, I am in my Miro, where a lot of research is done with me and my team of enthusiasts. So, if you have any questions about any of these topics, any mythologies, we have charts that I make, so we use these to kind of research them. Over here are the evolutionary maps that I do dedicated videos about. Here's the Dawn Goddess one. Here's the Dawn God one. Over here is one I'm working on. And then here, I think this is the Kybali one. Yeah, the first one I did in that series. So I work on little bits of all of that from here to there, but this is a separate kind of fun topic. I will have some maps that are a little more dedicated to specific things. So that's what this is going to be. Yep. Okay. Just trying to monitor, make sure everything works. I have no idea, frankly. I think it's fine. I don't know. So, oh, bless me. Essentially, this is like a free kind of open research session, so it's not like I'm going to talk the whole time if no one has any questions, you know. Just kind of working through stuff, showing that I'm available, right? My work hours, my office hours, study hall, basically. So we got most popular ones would be the Greek pillars and the anemoi. I'll start with the anemoi. So what I was thinking of doing for these, I'll have to copy one of these images, one of these right here. Is I'm thinking of looking at each region and showing relative to that region where their winds are directionally. I thought that would be kind of interesting to look at. And then I could also draw lines between them, potentially showing evolution if necessary. Some things are indeed inherited. So the most popular Greek one would be Boreas of the North. checking out, making sure. Yep. I don't think I'll be doing necessarily. You know, I'm not going to do linguistics. I'm really just trying to show where these are. So we got Boreas in the north. So if Greece is here, Boreas in the north is associated with, well, Hyperborea, which would be, I guess, theoretically way further north, but nonetheless, specifically he is considered Thracian, and Thrace is this region here. And in particular, some of the mountains up here is his association. So it makes sense. That would be exactly where he is then. What color I'll use, I think, yeah. So I do have a color system going with on this one, which is based on, yeah, I should probably explain this. Okay, so there are mainly 4 directions or pillars or winds in virtually many cultures. Sometimes they're a little different. So as you can see here, I have not directions specifically. These are cold, wet, hot, and dry. Why that is because it makes sense. Thematically, there might be some deities that are traded between cultures, like for instance the if you look down here, the Hindu wind gods and the Vedic wind gods became Buddhist, then they went into China and Korea and Japan, and they became associated, blended sometimes with other native Chinese and East Asian deities, and they took on new characteristics, or sometimes those characteristics, those deities, would be associated with a different direction than in India. So we'll see that kind of play out. But I would like to color code them by where they stand kind of here, or the color that they're specifically associated with. Now, I don't think the Greek and Roman and even Norse, Lithuanian, not necessarily associated with colors. It's only when you get to India and Chinese and even Aztec, Mayan, even Ojibwa, that you start to have colors more associated with them. So for now, there's no color that they're specifically associated with. I will color them based on their category here then, generally. And I guess the color I'll choose for cold, if there's no other color, is, yeah, they're all kinds of things. I guess black comes up quite a lot for them. But intuitively cold, I'm thinking of like a cyan color. Wet, probably blue. A lot of them are blue or green, and blue-green sometimes is conflated in a lot of cultures. Then hot would be red, clearly, and dry, I think yellow. Yellow or white would be a good one. White, I don't think is going to stand out. It's very different in here. But I think I might as well make it white, because sometimes yellow is more than this one. So another quick note about these categories is these mostly come up in the Chinese system because of the Yellow Emperor, the Jade Emperor, a variant of the Red Emperor that is a little different, and then the Shangdi Purple Emperor, which is not always like acknowledged, but there is indeed a kind of transcendent purple emperor in Shangdi. The difference between those is a center, in the center of the 4 winds, like the earth or the center of the world, that is Huangdi, the yellow emperor. Then you have above, below, and beyond. Below would be like underworld, chthonic. Above would be either the mountaintop, a mountain king, kind of like Yudi is, and then beyond that would be like really stellar or astral or celestial or sky sort of stuff. Yeah, so Shangdi. And I have a few kind of comparisons with other cultures that are these asterisk symbols are for not really being certain, or I guess they're not even just certain. They're just my guesses or my suggestions of things that are thematically resonant. So, like Kronos, for instance, Saturnus is in line with the center, if there was anything, in a Greek system. Uranus would be also beyond, the sky god. There's some correlations with other cultures with certain traits that Kronos, Saturn have, with Huangdi, Kaishen, Kubera, Enlil, stuff like that. So that is generally the framework I'm working with. So let's actually get to coloring then. I guess with this color, I'm either doing a cyan or a black color, just because it comes up so often. Green, yellow are already kind of represented. I don't know if I can do a black color. It'd be gray. Yeah. Basically. Maybe that'll look ugly and I won't end up doing it, but it seems to be okay. Alright, just checking in. Again, if you don't understand the context of this video, you can go to the beginning and hear my introduction, and then come back here and ask questions. I'm open to any questions, even any redirections, because I have my Miro open. I can't tell if anyone's really there right now. It says there's people in here, but feel free to send a message in the chat, ask any questions. I'm just kind of doing a research session, chilling here, working on the four winds across the globe. Okay, so now south. Let's just make a few placeholders. I don't know for sure if all of these are going to end up like fitting really well in their respective areas. Conveniently, there aren't actually every culture around here doesn't necessarily have a four winds concept that has at least survived. Like, I don't know of one in Anatolia, really. Even in Hittite, I don't know if they have one like that. I know Romans do, because they inherited a lot of it from Greek. So there should be enough space, I think, for everything, honestly. So yes, south would be, I believe it's Notus, right? Or yeah, I'm going with this Greek Anmoy system first. I'm kind of skipping the pillars because they're a little more obscure. We got Boreas north, Eurus east, Notus is the south, like I thought, and then Zephyr in the west. Yep. So Notus, being southern, is red. East is Eurus, west is Zephyr, I think I was going with east being white. Yeah, I think I can do that. I can get away with that. It's a little lighter, yeah. And then the west depends. Oh, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, so the system is a little more complicated. It's not merely, I want to show what directions they are, but actually the most important part of these deities is their kind of climate and their wind direction, which is associated with, in general, the most universal way to categorize it is cold, wet, hot, and dry. Different seasons kind of have different winds coming in from different directions depending on where you are in the world. So every pantheon has a kind of different scheme of where the dry and the wet and different seasons interact with the winds. So although Zephyr and Notus, not Notus, Eurus. Although Zephyr and Eurus are east and west, Zephyr represents the dry kind of spring wind, spring-summer wind from the west in the Mediterranean, and then Eurus represents the storm clouds and stuff. It's part of why Zeus I have here, or Zis, which is the Mississippian, basically related to Illyrian or Albanian people that lived in the boot of Italy early on. Their Zeus was associated with the eastern wind. Volturnus was a name of a particular deity of theirs associated with Zeus and Eurus, and it was kind of all that. So so Eurus, if anything, resembles kind of what a Zeus would be, is very much a wet season, or wet directional, like storms, rain. So that's why I put him in this, and so the color I kind of chose with this one that generally comes up a lot is blue. This one, dry, I have as white. So actually, this is not dry. Like, if it's white, it's not dry. Or it should be dry, but it's not. You know, that white actually looks better than gray. So I can take that. I'm forgetting what color it was. Blue. What kind of blue? Either rich blue or like a chill blue. Probably chill. And then with a harder navy or something. So again, that wet season, hot season, cold season, and dry season. They're not all seasons purely, but you kind of get what I'm going for. Fun. Okay, so now looking at the Roman, because it'll be the next easiest one. Boreas, I remember, is not Aeolus. I don't know why I'm forgetting Aquilo. Are they called Ventos? Let me get my database here. This is another thing that sometimes comes up here. My Obsidian database. I have a lot of different ways of storing information on here. I think I called the windows. No. Ventis, alright. That's the Latin name. Okay, Aquilo, and I'm trying to remember the other ones. Nope, not remembering exactly. Aquilo, yes, Volturnus, that's right. Because Volturnus was worshipped by the Mississippians in southern Italy. Yeah. And they adopted him as like the east wind. And then Auster and Favonius. Yeah, Favonius is said here. Okay. right here, actually. I have a map. I like how I sometimes say like geographic locations, even though it's right here and I can just point to it. Yeah, this region right here, this particular part of the boot, is where the Messapians lived. They were related, like I said, to Illyrians here. Albanians are the last remnant of Illyrians who lived here. So they were specifically associated with Turnus, who represented storms and stuff, and so he was conflated or syncretized a lot with Jupiter and Zeus. Jupiter by the Romans, Zeus by the Greeks. So again, you see here, it's like just because these are next to each other doesn't mean they're related. Obviously, it's relative. Zephyr and Favonius both represent, they both represent a dry season, a dry, favorable wind. And basically all of these things are the same meaning. I always thought it was kind of funny, the linguistics of Auster, which is related to Australia, and Australis, like the Aurora Australis, means south in Roman and Latin. And to me, it's just always means like Austria and these other Baltic stuff that we'll look at. It means east. So I'm just like, why is the southeast? You know, I get confused. And again, if audio is a problem or anything else is a problem, please leave a message so I can help fix that problem. Just checking in here. Any questions? I am literally here. I'm able to answer questions. I'd be happy to go down whatever rabbit hole someone wants to throw at me today. I just have a thing to do. It's very interesting, though. It's kind of fun to do. I like these colors. They're like Skittles or something. All right. So in this case, I can draw a line because they're so closely related, despite their names technically being different. And their meaning is so identical and they're so translated directly that I'm going to draw lines here. There seems to have been, with the Anemoi and the Venti, some heavy Greek influence on the Roman. Which is typical. I'm going to do a dotted line though, because again, the linguistics of them is so unique and interesting that they could have their own history. And since wind gods are so widespread across the entire globe, specifically Eurasia mostly, especially, no, really all of Eurasia, it implies that these might be very old concepts. So even if these influenced them in some manner, there's probably some precedent for them. I know with Aquilo, I often wonder if I just put this here, I often wonder if it's it seems to be related to water or aqua, or the that kind of concept. And I'm not going to do a dotted line. I'll do like this kind of line, like just connection. Maybe not even an arrow, because what direction would that be? But in Norse, Aegir is a wind god in Norse. Aguijas is his like Germanic, Proto-Germanic reconstructed name, and it does mean water, and he's associated with kind of this region here. Not explicitly, he's kind of generally associated with the north as well as Njord is. Njord is another very similar, sometimes conflated, potentially is the same, or a deity in Norse. And he does mean the north wind. They both are like Vanir kings before the Aesir in this region. And he's associated with fishing and stuff. So I often wonder if there's not some connection with this and this as a complex. So yeah, I can also put stuff like that in. Well, thanks for the comment. Let me read it here. I don't know if I have comments turned on to, I don't even know how to put it on the screen, but you can just look over the chat to read. Austria is the Österreich, Eastern Realm. I guess it all depends on what you're east of being with. Yeah, so east goes further back than just Austria and Österreich, obviously. But yes, the Ost is the Eastern Germans, which the other word for them is the Goths. If I could bring this up here, I could very quickly show. I have a whole ethno-linguistic categorization system here that I use, and I have done much trial and error for. I categorize it as Western, Indo-European, let's go Germanic. So in Germanic, there's basically, ignore the Futhark, it's just kind of a categorization system. There's Gothic, Norse, and Westic. Westic is like Western Germanic. Anglo-Saxon is Westic. It's really like proper German. It's almost more like Southern. Norse is obviously in Scandinavia. And then Gothic is over towards, they spread this way, and they started to mix with Sarmatians and Scythians and stuff like that. And then from there they started to infiltrate the Byzantine Empire and go into places like Austria, and ultimately some of them over here to Spain with the I know their names, Visigoths. So there's the Ostrogoths, Visigoths is Western Goths, but they're both related to the same Gothic, Eastern Germanic group. So yeah, all of Europe is east of England and Ireland, but the Japanese consider China the West from their perspective. It's all relative. Exactly. So that's the system here that I'm going to show, is that these colors are not the same everywhere. They're the same in the Mediterranean, northern here, because these are very similar climates, but as soon as the climate starts changing, a lot of places are very different. And often I wondered, I had a question about the southern hemisphere, because if north in the northern hemisphere is cold, because obviously it's cold, the poles are in that direction, that's how climate works, then theoretically if someone had wind gods in the southern hemisphere, shouldn't the southern deity be the cold deity, and it would flip? The funny thing is, I have yet to find too many cultures in the southern hemisphere that even have wind, the anemoi or winds or pillars like that. The furthest south I've found is Mayan and Aztec. I can't even find any in Inca. I wonder if there's some in Guarani over here, or maybe Patagonian or something. There was almost some in Polynesian with like in New Zealand, the Maori, but it didn't quite pan out that way. They have like a bunch of different wind demons that are children of the wind god. Aboriginal Australian, I would think, would have something. I haven't found any yet. Of anyone that would have one, I would think they might. And then I would have to look a little more into potentially Sotho, Zambezi, and maybe the Click languages, as they say, the Khoisan. But so far, no dice. I would like to prove that hypothesis, and it'd be pretty interesting. A great video on YouTube where two guys have a conversation in Old Norse and Old English, and it's super fun. As a bad German speaker and native English speaker, I was able to get most of it. That's pretty funny, yeah. It's funny to actually hear in Dutch, Frisian. Sorry for throwing the screen everywhere, but it's pretty fun to hear the Dutch language, or Old Dutch and Old Frisian languages, because they're West Germanic and they have the most close relationship to Anglo-Saxon and eventually English. So yeah, okay, tangent aside, Those aren't always like four-wind deities, but part of the reason I go there, and so this is a good segue into Norse. I'm pretty sure that's a next topic anyway. Yeah, I'll go back to the Greek pillars after the Norse here, because Norse is funny. Interesting, funny, whatever. Nordry. I see I have Aegir and Nord here as potential. Let's say dwarf. So in Norse, there's the four dwarves, the four pillars of the world. Nordry is the northern one. Sometimes it's difficult to really pinpoint where the center of the Norse culture is. Early on, very early on, it's down here in Zealand and Scania. Much later, obviously, it migrates kind of up into the Norway and splits off from Swedish to a good degree and whatnot. But I think for the sake of our argument, these two deities, or at least Aegir, are specifically associated with Zealand, the island between Denmark and Sweden, because that's where they're associated with agriculture. That's where agriculture basically began. In pre-Norse, it would actually be kind of during the Bronze Age and Chalcolithic that there was first farming down there. They were bringing cattle. That's where a lot of the Vanir are kind of coded that way. Freya, Frey, Aegir. They're Neolithic coded. So yeah, I'll put these two up here because they are both explicitly northern, and if we're considering the center maybe to be somewhere around here, then that might make sense. Okay, so we got... It's pretty easy to remember these ones too, because their names are Germanic, therefore related to English. So Nordry, north, Vestry, west, Austry, east, and Sudry, south. So it all kind of sounds right. The reason I'm hesitating here is because I don't think it's as pure and simple as dry and wet. I think, okay, Vestry is wet. Austria is more dry. Okay, so that does work. And that makes sense because you'd have the North Sea winds over here. Oh, sorry, this is... Oh, yeah. So we do have a flip over here. We have a flip where east is actually drier. Despite it being, you know, Baltic Sea. But if you know anything about weather, you know that North Sea is quite a monster. Baltic also has lots of stuff going on, though. Okay, so this is Vestry. So Vestry's potentially the Sudry is still associated with like summer and warmth and all that, though. Let's put them down here. We'll read a comment here quick. There aren't many cultures close to Antarctica, but there are a few obscure references to it in ancient texts, or so it seems. The roaring 40s waves are brutal and very difficult to sail even today. There are ancient texts about Antarctica? Oh, I guess I have seen a few videos about like some, I think maybe even Phoenicians, some people think might have gotten down to the Horn of Africa. I don't know if I believe that. I think the farthest they went seemed to have been the Congo, because they brought back supposedly gorillas, which they called like hairy people. And that was like the end of their journey. That was like when they came back. They're like, yeah, I've had enough of this. Because they went way from over here all the way down. Yeah, and they also traded up here in the tin, in Cornwall with tin. So they were, Phoenicians were all over the place. As far as anyone else going down there, I don't know who else could have. The Phoenicians were like the most advanced, and the one that we know was kind of navigating the Atlantic early on. They even settled Tenerife and these islands here, the Canary Islands. Canarian mythology, very fascinating. It's an offshoot of Berber Amazigh mythology, and lasted up until Spanish conquest, unfortunately. But yeah. In general, you know, there's not very much land mass in the southern hemisphere. There just isn't. And just on the basis of where it is, it's a lot of subtropical region, and that means it's very dry in that latitude. So there's desert here, and then it's savanna dry here, and then there's desert here, and the only wet part of Australia is basically right here for, and then up here, because this is more tropical. So just because there's a lot of desert, there's not much carrying capacity. Over here, there's a lot more people that live. And by the way, the mountains, it gets to be a little better here. Not as dry, not like desert. There's desert right here, though. Really, really bad desert. The Atacama. So, you know, there's just not much land mass down here to populate enough people to roll the dice on ideas like that. Let me zoom in here. Our word for south is from Sun, meaning direction of the sun. Yeah, Sunth. And then Sutri is the Sooth, the D and Thul or whatever, Thu are interchangeable at times. Makes sense. There's a lot of deities here, especially in the Americas, that are, their southern deity is associated explicitly with spring and the sun. So yeah, that's Norse. I'm just trying to wrap up a few of these comments. Homes in the northern hemisphere have south-facing windows to catch the sunlight. This is true. They mention the sun rising on the right or starboard, east, after rounding the Cape, and heading north after the sun rising on their left port while heading south. The Phoenicians, you're saying? That's why the waves get so large. There are no land masses to break them. Yeah. Up so they swirl at the 40th latitude. Yeah. Roaring 40s. Yeah, interesting. Actually, I knew that, but I haven't had it put that way before, the roaring 40s. But yeah, like right here, basically, this whole waterway here in the southern Atlantic, it's just unbroken, and it swirls. I cut out Antarctica from my map because there's no mythologies to map on Antarctica, unfortunately. I mean, there just aren't. Some people might think they are, but I would not say so. All right, moving on. Let's go back into the Mediterranean for a second. Because the Greek pillars are really quite interesting, and there's a few different names associated with them. And these are both, I have Greek and Roman names here for some of these: Krios, Krios, Koios, and so on. The point is they're Greek, and the Roman versions are a direct translation of the Greek. But they're really interesting because they seem to be the most archaic, like more old than a lot of these. These ones, to me, especially Boreas, have a little bit of like an Indo-European code to me. Like they seem to be in line with that. They correlate with some of these. They correlate with the Baltic that I'll mention after this. But these pillars are a lot older, seemingly. They are specifically considered to be Titans. They are associated with the south, and also the equator is Koios, or sorry, not Koios, Krios and Krios. The Titan pillars. So he's not only associated with the south, but with equators. By the way, no, I turned my desktop audio off. If there's any clicking when I'm clicking things, just tell me, because there's a clicking sound in one of my videos that I had to edit out because I didn't know that it was picking up desktop audio, and I don't even hear clicking when I'm doing it. So anyway, if that's an issue, just tell me. His opposite, his twin brother, is of the north. And that would be Koios, which I was writing earlier. Koios. They are twins. And then there's the dry and, yeah. So the dry one, in this case, actually, is associated with the east. It's Hyperion. And Hyperion is treated as basically the predecessor to Helios, like even before Apollo, as being the sun god, just because he's the parent of the sun and the moon, Selene and Helios, with Thea. But interestingly enough, he's associated with the east. And that is considered a kind of a dry, deserty, the sun, drought, that kind of vibe. It's more oriented, associated with like the Middle East from the Greek perspective. Okay. And then the wet one, or the wetter one, would be, I guess the oldest would be Iapetus. Iapetus. That's the oldest, and the second oldest, or very similar age, would be Astraeus. These are treated as two separate deities, but like a lot of their myths align with one another and correlate, oddly enough. You can hear typing, but no problem. Yeah, it's just my typing. That's just literally coming from here. I type furiously. So, yeah, and Astraeus is partnered with Eos, the dawn goddess, and Iapetus is partnered with Asia, the goddess of Asia, which is Anatolia. And that is attested even back to the Mycenaeans, referring to an Asia goddess. And to me, those are very similar. Asia being a dawn goddess would make a lot of sense if Eos was an Indo-European dawn goddess, but Asia or Clymene was a native Neolithic dawn goddess of Asia. It would make sense that she's so old, she's a Titan, that some of the mythology and the relationship kind of duplicated a few times, right? Iapetus and Astraeus are both considered to be pillars of the West, holding up the very same pillar that who else but Atlas would eventually be holding up. I guess it's pillar 2. So yeah, the pillars of Atlas, which many assume is over here. The reality is, when I look at a lot of myths in the Greek tradition, they don't tend to talk about anything in this direction, in the Western Mediterranean. They go as far as the Tyrrhenian Sea and Tunisia sometimes, but like no further. It would almost seem that the Greek Mediterranean was this area here, and that they just didn't know much about this, or maybe they even kind of conflated this with this very early on, obviously much before Herodotus and other sources kind of made maps. But that means that pillars of Atlas might not have been so far west. They might have not actually been in the Atlantic Ocean. They might have been over here. This is, I think, the best possible hypothesis for not only where the pillars of Atlas might have been, but also right here where Atlantis might have been. And there was someone who came out with a video recently. I'm forgetting the exact channel name, unfortunately, and all that, but they were putting forth that hypothesis, and I was like, this is totally, I'm down with this, because I've been thinking this for a long time. These are the Atlas Mountains. These are where Atlas was associated with. And the Hesperides in the far west, the gardens of the Hesperides were associated with Atlas Mountains. And in this period, or in not this period, but in much older times, the Sahara was green, and this region was actually very, it had very good carrying capacity. And the Berbers, Amazigh ancestors lived there. And there are many things that are attributed to the Berbers and Amazigh in Greek tradition. They call them Libyans and other names, and they lived in this entire region here. I suspect that might be where they actually were, but for the sake of mainstream legibility, I'll put all three of those over there. And so part of the reason I put these on each side of the Mediterranean is a lot of them are associated with those parts of the Mediterranean, which is another reason why I think it's so old, maybe even Pelasgian in origin, those four pillars, because they are widespread, treated as widespread. You know, Koios associated with the exact northern North Pole, you know, Krios with the, I guess they would say South Pole, even though they don't know where that was. Really, it was more like the equator that they were pointing to. But yeah, those are interesting. And I think that's all the names I have here for these. Astraeus, Hirion. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not going to map these on here, I don't think, because they're purely speculative, not like speculating what they actually thought, but for the sake of my own purposes, correlating with other cultures like Chinese, especially where they have a very rigorous directional system. If Greeks were to adopt a similarly rigorous system, they might include stuff like Chronos, Atlas, and Ornos. And Atlas being here would be theoretically, even though he's associated with the West. It'd be theoretical because he's the most important or the most remembered sky pillar, and he's treated almost as the single one. Ultimately, one might consider that to be like a mountain father, mountain king, central, above location, similar to what the Jade Emperor UD is in China. Because he's not purely heavenly, he is on the mountain, bridging between the heavens and the earth. Whereas Ornos is more actually in the heavens, far away over there, like Shangdi is. And Huangdi is on the earth, on the farms, in the mortal realm of sorts, at the center of the cosmos. So yeah, let's go to Lithuanian then. Any more questions? I'll check here. I think I got a cat that wants to come in. 1 second. Come, kitty. Okay. Drinking some water, reading some questions. Iapetus is where Japheth, Europeans in the Bible, comes. Yes, so eventually with Gnostic and Christian syncretism, and first it was Jewish during the Hellenic period, when Alexander conquered the Middle East. There was a lot of syncretism, and one of those was Iapetus being Japheth from the Bible, or not, from the Torah actually. And that's really, it's interesting. It's curious. I mean, the thing about Iapetus and his characteristics is he's considered the father of humankind because he's the parent of Prometheus. And if you know Prometheus apparently created humankind out of clay, very similar to what Enki does, very similar to effectively what Yahweh does, supposedly. My hunch is that the Yahweh doing that is from Enki, that particular story of him creating humankind, and also in the garden and Noah's Ark and all that are all basically Enki from Sumer, or Ea, or Haya from Semitic groups. And Iapetus is quite similar to that. He, as a father of humankind, kind of has that vibe. I almost think of him as more like the Egyptian Ptah, who's also a craftsman, sculptor, and all that. So there's definitely an interesting layer of syncretism going on there, and then a curious kind of still understanding of there might have been this very old, archaic creator god that sculpted humanity out of clay that seems to have been widespread. Found its way into the lineage of Iapetus and Prometheus and all these other figures. Prometheus, of course, seems to be more of like Caucasian origin, which became part of Indo-European and then went back into Greece and so on. But a bit of a tangent. Most ancient maps are drawn with the east at the top of the page, so they can be a little funky. Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't seen too many of those. I heard the Egyptians had it upside down. Lower and Upper Egypt, literally lower and upper. Yeah, sorry for stating the Hebrew Torah. There is no Hebrew Torah. Yeah, that's a later anachronism that I stated. Yeah, the Septuagint, the Pentateuch, or whatever. Those are the collections. Yeah. Septuagint. You're correct. That is the actual original biblical source. All right, answering those. So let's do Baltic next. I'm thinking, yes, probably put both of those down. So with Lithuanian, one of the Baltic mythologies, we have Saurus in the north. Might be related to Slavic Strybog, I have recently kind of wondered linguistically, who is their northern wind god. Then there's Veopatis, which is most certainly related to Vayu and Vayuvata in the Hindu with the Baltic. A lot of Balto-Slavic has close ties with Indo-Aryan languages, and there's a lot of deities that kind of are shared between. Then we have Vakarus, which is the vest, again, Vak. And then Pietis, that's like there's a, I don't know if I even put it in here, but there's a Greek similar Pietis. I look at my database. I think Pyrois. Yeah, he's a Greek fire god of Mars. He's like a planetary deity. And so there's a lot of correlation between planetary deities and the directions. That is a layer here that I might need to add to this for the sake of memory. I'm going to quickly just add a little thing here. I'll do it between Norse and Lithuanian, I guess. Sure. Or I guess it would be Greek. Greek planets. So I'll put them right here, I guess. I don't know. The hot one is Pyrois. Not associated with directions in this, I don't think. Sometimes they're treated as the four horses of Helios embodied too, which makes them resemble the four horsemen a little, which is kind of interesting. Those also kind of potentially correlate to some of these in some ways. Yeah, my database is not showing one of the four. Forgetting the word for the Greek planets. Yeah, planetes, or planetae. Planetes. Okay. Yeah, I can't put all those in here just yet. And for memory, correlating with these would be pretty difficult. This one's pretty certain as a fire god. But if you can find what I'm looking for, send it in the chat. Who are the four planets, or 5 planets, in Greek mythology? So those are the specific planetary names. I know Mercury is, oh gosh, Yeah, I have to remember a lot of things when I do this stuff. Just remind me in there. Oh, we got some. That's your cat. Yeah, that's your cat. No. That's my cat. Mm-hmm. Yeah, she shouldn't be doing that on camera. Oh, is the kitty cat doing naughty things on camera? Oh no, taters. Oh, taters. Okay. Atabulus, you think might be the Mesepic equivalent of notice? Let me see if it's even in my database. Tabulous. No, it isn't. I will read a temporary note in here. As a question. Oops. There. Thank you. I like leads. No, you see, those are the planet. Those are the Greek names. Mercury is Greek. Or sorry, Roman. Mercury is Roman. Venus is Roman. Yeah, those are planetary correlations with the deities. I'm saying the literal planet names. Yes, 7 celestial bodies. There's a lot of 7 celestials, if you're including the sun and moon, Helios and Selene, or any other Apollo, Artemis or something. But then there's 5 that are the traditional planets: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And I'm saying there's specific names in Greek. Pyros is, I don't know how you spell it, pronounce it honestly. It's Mars, and that's the only one I have. So anyway, I have more in my database, but I forgot the name that I put them in my database collectively. Anyway, moving on to what I do have in Lithuania. I just want to make that little connection of the linguistics of fire, pyro, in Lithuanian, and the Greek planet. So planet is not outside of the wheel of possibility for directional associations. Of course, Venus associated with the east. So yes, I think Eosphoros or phosphorus might be, if I'm not mistaken, that should be the east. Venus in that group. And I think Vesper, I'm remembering now, Vesper and Hesperus as west. But those are not planets per se, that's just Venus in the morning and Venus in the evening. The morning and dusk star. So anyhow, Ceres, Vacarus, Pisces. Nope. Lithuania, homeland is right here. Retis, I remember, is dawn. And then Ciaris, is it? Ciaris? Ciaris. Yep. Vacarus. Yes. for the winds of theirs too. I'm not remembering the specific Lithuanian name for the winds. Singular. No. Thank you. All right, those four. In terms of which one's wet, which one's dry, I believe it might not be so simple in every case like that. I just make the choice. East wind. Yeah. His name just means easterly. Yeah. Vacarus, another one specifically associated with the evening star. So you see that Vesper, Hesperus linguistic going on there. Yeah, I'm not seeing, I'd have to look further into it to see if there's like more of a weather difference. But my suspicion would be that if you're in, you know, the Baltic Sea is where your weather is coming from, and then obviously very cold up here, and then the dry continental climate of this direction. Those winds, dry winds, would be coming from that direction. Because climate is all about continental or maritime and hot and cold. So this is continental heat, hot continental cold, and this is somewhat maritime to a degree, north cold, and then maritime. I mean, it's not necessarily hot and cold at this latitude, but you kind of get what I mean. Continental versus maritime, and then hot versus cold. There we go. I think you finally found some names for me. Phosphoros, Hesperus. Yeah, he could be the same in a sense of like the evening and the dusk, but or the dawn and the dusk. I mean, morning star and evening star. But also the linguistics here with Vacarus is interesting. Then we have, I saw Phaenon there. Stillborn, that is Mercury, yes. Thank you, Carl. Planets. Okay, so we're going to have more, obviously, if we're looking for 5, and I'm not even going to start with the Sun and Moon, because they don't really necessarily fit into this framework. But the other 5 planets I can still work with. Yeah, Phaenon I think is Saturn, so I would theoretically put that. Here, asterisks, because Kronos is here. Then Stillborn I would put with Mercury actually. Or sorry, with cold, northern, because there are other reasons that Mercury tends to be the north, especially Coeus. So, oh, I forgot to mention, Coeus associated with Mercury, Creus associated with Mars. So yet again, and the Mercury and Mars thing, they are often twins and different stuff. And you'll see in Aztec, when we get to it, there's a very interesting correlation there. So, yeah, Phaethon. Yeah, Phaethon is a weird one because Phaethon is like a fallen sun god. He actually has more in common with a Venus type deity than with anything like Zeus, or Jupiter even. So that's a weird happenstance, I think, in the system. But if we're having Jupiter, it generally tends to be associated with like the mountain father in a sense, or the king. I could put it here temporarily. I think it's not always so simple as that, but that is Jupiter. Wait, why am I putting that there? There we go. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh yeah, because of duplication here. And then we're missing Venus. Yeah, no, we're not. What am I missing? Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. We're not missing anything. Okay, so 5, but really we have 6 because we're counting dusk Venus, which tends to happen. It happens from time to time. Alright, thanks for finding those for me. I will finish this one here. Yeah, Veopatis I can put down. As northern. And he is the father of these wings. He's literally their father. Which you might think that would be central, and in some cases it is. But in many of these cases, the parent of the 4 winds is the northern wind. I think that's the case with Njord to a degree as well, or no, not the dwarves. No, it's not the case with him. But over here it is. There's also another name for the Baltic wind god. Langputis is actually Latvian, or no, not Latvian, it's Prussian, I think. Prussian, yeah. So Veopatis is Lithuanian, yeah. So he's the wind father and also the wave father. And his general correlation is the Baltic Sea. That's like his realm. So yeah, I mean, I'll just say Baltic in general for those who even know the Lithuanian. Bang, pictures. Okay. Okay, so I'm adding an additional one in here, and it's still associated with the East, with Retis of the East, and that's, I think, Ostra. There might be a few better words. Cyclist, yes. Okay, so there's Ostros or Oseklis of Latvian and Lithuanian of Baltic. Eastern Dawn god, he's very much vibing with the morning star, Lucifer, phosphorus thing that we were mentioning. And of course his linguistics very much in that wheelhouse. Dawn Star, of course, he's associated with the East. There's also a funny, little, not funny, but it is funny, little myth where he tries to go swimming in the Baltic Sea and Bangladesh tries to drown him. He does not succeed. But it's kind of interesting seeing Austria here and then seeing him trying to drown him. Just kind of, interesting. And that drowning motif kind of reminds me of the Phaenon myth, but that's a totally different complication here. And I'm not entirely sure where I would put the planets here with the Greek planets. I think they would end up being very general. Probably in the same locations as the pillars, just because they're broadly directional, but mostly planetary. I suppose it doesn't hurt to put Pyroice here. Am I mixing up words again? No, I'm not. They're so similar. And then Stillbond. Those correlate very closely because they're both Mercury related. Oops. And then I would say Vesper or Hesperus is very much similar or overlaps with Astraeus, even though he is a son of Astraeus, actually. So this is one of those interesting situations where we saw North God, Wind God, being the parent of the four winds. Well, in the pillars in Greek, the Titan period, Astraeus and Eos, so the West God and the East Goddess, are parents of kind of four winds. It's not these exact ones here. It's the Vesper and Phosphorus kind of four winds. And I believe the planets, actually, specifically the planets. So yeah, Pyro. All those are their children. And there's, I think, a similar... There was a similar thing in Baltic happening too. They have these winds, and then this and his brothers are actually planets, or his sisters actually. They're more like sisters because they're female in Baltic, the planets. And they're children of the Dawn Goddess and the Moon God in Baltic. So you got a few different parentages here and there. But that Dawn, being the mother of the planets, is a very interesting situation. I have a lot of comments I should respond to. Lucifer is the son of Dawn in most versions. Lots of names still retain Luke, meaning bright. Yes, Lug, and these types of things. Their names, Lucifer. Even Lugal, the name for a type of Sumerian king, is like a bright or shining great man. So, yes, in the Semitic sources or in Judaic sources, Lucifer, or I guess their name for Lucifer, Halal ben Shahar, which means halal of dawn, or basically a deity of dawn. He's the son of dawn in a few different Semitic, like Ugaritic, and then Judaic forces. Dawn is Shahar, so and that seems it's a male deity, a male twin deity, who's apparently Lucifer's father. So yeah, that's how they treat it. They've been conflated here and there, though. You know, like what's the difference between the dawn god and the dawn god? You know, but originally it seems to be there was some sort of lineage there. So you watched a YouTuber that looked at Polish folklore practices, and she identified 4 deities that could be identified with the 4 winds. However, she does admit that it is speculative. I would love to hear those. If you could send a link to that video or any of those speculations. I love a good speculation, but I could cross-reference it with my database and whatnot to try to see how close it gets. I've done a lot of research on Balto-Slavic. It's one of the places we went pretty deep over here. This one, Baltic and Slavic stuff. I think sometimes I talk about stuff and I shouldn't. Here we go. I got a whole section over here with all information anyone needs. Okay, so these are all female stars. The stars in Baltic are Saturn, evening star, morning star, Mars, Jupiter, and Mercury. So I think there's a similar, yeah, the closest in Slavic, they have a few missing, but there's dawn, midday, which is interesting, then there's dusk, and nighttime. So this nighttime one, this would be Mars. People don't always know this, but Mars is the midnight star because it only comes out at night because it's on the opposite side from the Earth, from the Sun. So yeah, they have these, and then this is an interesting deity that has kind of Demeter vibes to it. Maybe it's more solar related. It doesn't quite align with these unless it's like Saturn or Jupiter or something, or even Vivora. Then you have the winds over here, like I said, you know, these 4 winds, children of Bangputis, Veopatis. Ostros is a son. He's much like Eros, a son of the dawn goddess, so like Eos or Aphrodite, parent of Eros or Phosphorus. Then in Slavic we've got, where are the winds? I don't remember if it had winds. I'm assuming, but I don't think so. They got planets. No, so I'd be very curious to find your Polish speculations because they would maybe help with a Slavic reconstruction of that. But yes, that's where we're at. Just checking some comments. Iguanas falling out of the trees all the time when you get a cold Arctic blast. Yeah, I've heard of that. People getting hit by iguanas. Okay, thanks for the Peruvian video suggestion. And yes, there's a lot of good fairy tale stuff in Balto-Slavic. It's one of our favorite to look into. Alright, moving into stranger directions because we're coming up on hour 2 and I have barely touched this. But thanks for the comments. I appreciate having stuff to respond to. Yep. So now we could probably go to Hindu then. And Vedic. And it's hard to distinguish between why we say one or the other, really. But basically Vedic is like older and a little more Indo-European coded, and then Hindu has some more refinement, a few more additions and changes, but they're pretty subtle. They're basically just slightly different names. So Vedic, most important one to start with here, because it moves into the Buddhist. I guess that's why, yeah, whatever. Vishrava and Ravana are in the north. They're not Ravana. Yeah, so let me explain some of the things I did, because I'm weird. It's Kubera that is traditionally associated with the north. So again, in here I have the direction they're associated with in the literature, or in the culture, in the sources, and sometimes the color. So we're going to start getting actual colors now. Kubera is associated with the north, but a lot of his ideas, I came to find a lot of his aspects as being like a wealthy god, a mountain god, have more to do with kind of the mountain central, grounded, earthy vibe. Whereas Vishrava, who's the parent of Kubera and Ravana, because Kubera and Ravana are brothers. Vishrava sometimes in Vedic is considered to be the north, but he's still kind of considered gold, because there's this lineage of like wealth that passes from Vishrava to Kubera to Ravana, because Ravana I think steals it from his brother Kubera in the myth, but that's going way too deep into that subtext. Nonetheless, when we're talking about what in India the different winds represent, you'll see how they can change depending on climate. Climates that can be very different. So Vishrava. I will take this black color, even though he's gold. And what am I going to do for gold? I guess I'll just have yellow. It's basically yellow gold, interchangeable. I'll do a slightly lighter one. There's gold. No. Gold. There. So let's do this. I'll still put Kubera here visually. His parent. And then I'll do something weird. You'll see why. Look, I do things for reasons. His brother, who isn't him at all, of the north, Ravana, is the villain of the Ramayana that abducts Sita, if I'm correct on Sita, yes, and brings her down to Kubera's original kingdom in Sri Lanka. Basically, the story happens down here. And Ravana is like a black-winged deity of essentially chaos. He has like 10 heads. He gains them from being blessed by Brahma. So there's a lot thematically in him that is similar to what we'll be looking at in China a little, once it translates. just say villain. And this is also mentioned in the Ramayana, but is generally, let's just say Hindu in general. Is effectively a fortune deity. And let's just call him Father Fortune. I'm just coming up with names here for the sake of memory. All right. So those three are associated with the north, and so you can probably kind of guess why in India the north would be associated with wealth, and particularly chthonic mountain wealth, right? The Himalayas. So I'm gonna get some, I guess I'm still doing blue. Sometimes blue and green are treated the same, you'll see. Alright, starting with the first one, we got those two. So Viruddhaka, Virupaksa, and Datta. And Viruddhaka. Might be spelling that wrong. Locopoly. Oops, I don't want to miss the colors here. East was him. And oh, he's south, actually. Yeah, so the wet one is in the south. I'll explain who they are in a second. Datta. This way, I think, actually. Yeah. Paksa, sorry. Paksa. I suppose I should probably just call these what they are instead of the general category. Okay, so we have the northern mountain, we have, which is generally cooler, we have the wet southern Viruddhaka, who's essentially a kind of green man in India, associated with blue or green or blue-green. Blue and green aren't always distinct colors in every language. And then Virupaksa is the red west. Then we have Datta as the east, and associated with yellow, actually. Didn't we have yellow here? Yeah, we had gold. Okay. Why is it not clicking properly? Oh. Love when that happens. It's not working at all. That's very strange. There we go. Talking about the Ramayana down there, I see. Okay, so, and the color associated with data originally is yellow. So that's kind of weird. It's kind of funny because they already have gold in the north. And like I said, this is, Ravana was not technically the northern god associated with black. Right here we have the color. Yes. Okay. Yep. Looking at the different variants in Hinduism, different deities that got associated with these directions at different times. There's a later kind of 8-wind system that they have where they added a few more directions, including northwest, southwest, stuff like that. And so I have northwest, southeast, southwest, etc. They're stated there. But I've correlated to like the closest possible thing, because obviously a 4 system and an 8 system are not the same. But taking just the motifs and the vibes, there's still some correlation that is kind of interesting. And I have these asterisks here because this is a speculative, you know, correlation going on. Strongest one, I think, or I'm quite certain actually, is Agni. He's associated with the southeast in that system. But since we're not doing a southeast specifically in our system here. I mean, I could. Like, there's nothing stopping me from doing it. I might as well. Southeast is both south and east in a sense, I guess. No, I might as well just take this one. Southeast, oddly enough, is way over here. Agni. And Agni is, of course, god of fire. And he's very similar because he's associated with planet Mars and fire and the ram. All these symbols are very similar to like what an Aries or Mars type correlation would be, which is like Creus. So Agni is like the most like that southern fiery energy. So we can see in this system they have both this west wing that is a fire, warm, desert associated deity, because this part right here, and also I suppose the Middle East, is fairly dry. It's desert. Whereas down here, very wet because there's jungle. It's going into the tropical zone. And it's interesting that down south, it's not heat that is prioritized, but the wetness, the wet season, the monsoon season of the green god, who is very much about growth and fertility. And Virupaksha more so kind of desert heat coming from this region. So like it'd be ideal to put it like there. That's kind of the idea. Data is interesting, however, because I mean, we can't color it white because there's not much dry here except for the dry heat. They color it yellow because of, I believe, association with fertility or wealth as well to some degree, but Bangladesh region, everything here quite wet. Downstream, maybe I'll put that there. Okay, now for the other ones, hurry up. Yeah. Vayu in the northwest. I'm going to take it right from here. Vayopatis, we said the cognate. Also, Vayuvata is the Indo-Aryan northern wind god. Hello, what are you doing? Something very strange is happening. What is going on? Is my stream still okay? Current bit rate is higher than recommended. Okay. Excellent streaming quality. Okay, I don't know what just happened. No, I don't need to describe the problem. Please get out of the way. Okay, I don't know what happened there. Anyway. Okay, Okay, so Vayuvata is actually a Vestan, not Zoroastrian. Zoroastrian, yes, but Vestan's the language. I would like to include that, so Iran. So, interesting how I'm correct about that being northwest, right? Northwest, yeah, Vayu is northwest. Interesting how you have Vayu in the northwest pointing directly towards the Indo-Aryan origin of him. Makes sense. But also the northwest is a kind of north, so... Varuna and Indra. So I put Varuna and Indra both in this section because, like, we already had Zeus, right, in Eurus, so there's already a precedent for the Jupiter deity being here, and like I put Phaethon over there because I couldn't in good conscience put him in this necessarily. It's not quite working. So but in this system, I think in this case, Indra is associated with the east, and Varuna is associated with the west in this system. And that would be because both east and west in India are storms. They both are. Because it's basically a giant continental peninsula in the Indian Ocean. So you got eastern storms and western storms different times a year. So both in that case are wet. got over here, Varuna, and is very much associated with this part of the Indian Ocean. And then east. Thunder god. So this is a sea god, this is a thunder god. And it makes sense that there's storms coming from here, there's storms coming from here. They both kind of have a different directionality, but similar motif to a degree. But it's like the difference between Poseidon and Zeus, right? It's not the same deity by any real stretch. Nerti is obscure. He is associated with the desert. So we actually have a true dry over here. The interesting thing is southwest. His wind is associated specifically with this desert, the Thar desert. So the very same kind of directionality that this would have, unless, I mean, this could be over here, you know, it could be that, it could be here too. East. So if that's southeast, then that's like basically you're sitting here is the center of this system, one might say. But really anywhere in that interior, I guess. All right, and then these are not quite applicable. There is an Indo-European construction that Varuna is Ouranos. I don't see how that could be justifiable in this context. Linguistically, there's some argument for it, but Varuna is more of like a Poseidon sea god, Ouranos more of a sky god. Brahma's more like Ouranos, in my opinion. Then we have under, below is Yama, right? The first man to die. He's associated with the south in this system, which if he's associated with the direction is kind of fun to put here. The chthonic underworld god, what color is that? I'm thinking that's kind of green. But as we said, blue-green is kind of the color we're going for here. But I'll do a green because he's kind of an outlier in this system. Another reason I'm doing green is because the green or the green man is like the dead king or the dying god of the underworld. Osiris is also green-skinned. You know, there's a global motif of the green man being a chthonic deity. And it makes a lot of sense that Virudhaka, who is of essentially a green man, would be in the same direction as Yama. So think about that. Very interesting. Whenever I do stuff like this, it's almost like a puzzle. Like I enjoy doing it because it's like a puzzle and stuff starts to make sense and clicks into place and it's like, oh wow, okay. Gives a new perspective. Poseidon was earthquake, terrestrial god, even before the sea, father than anything to do with the sky or weather. Yeah, true. His patron animal was the horse, hence the Trojan horse, to honor their patron god of the earthquakes and the sea, both found in Troy itself. Tsunami and earthquakes have always gone together. Yeah. So the Greeks had a very old philosophical view that islands and continents were floating in the world ocean, that they didn't actually touch the earth below. There was no earth below. The idea is that the earth was floating on top of the sea. And so the correlation of earthquakes with the sea was very normal to them. It was just common sense. It's like, well, of course, a sea god, it causes earthquakes because it makes the boat rock, right? So yes. And Anisidon is the name of that particular old Mycenaean and potentially Minoan or Cretan version of Poseidon. The horse stuff clearly must have came in from after Indo-European influence of the Mycenaeans and whatnot. And there are a lot of Indo-European kind of river god motifs, like Scythian and whatnot, that seem to be part of Poseidon's origin. Also Neptune and Nethunes and Nepots. These are all Indo-European nephew is what that means, deities, and they seem to be the basis of at least Neptune and syncretized with this Poseidon figure. So it's very complex, that one. Varuna, there is Eruna in Hittite too, who is the sea god of Hittite. So there's definitely, Varuna shows up in Hittite as well. A lot of people, I don't know anyone else that talks about that either. Finishing up this here, northeast, yeah. Everything else is, so this is the last one, Ishana, in this particular system, northeast. I think they're treated as weather and rain. Yeah, water, rain, northeast, conflated with Shiva. And when I say conflated, I mean like it might not be true, it might not be the case, but people sometimes say that. So Ishana, Isana. And this, it would make enough sense to a degree because this is still the Himalayas we're looking at in that direction. And it's also a very old region. The Naga people, they would have been Afro-Asiatic, related to Cambodian and Mon and Vietnamese. Originally settled this region and did rice-based agriculture here, way before the Indo-Europeans came in. You know, and the Dravidians were also obviously there in Indus Valley and all that before the Indo-Europeans as well. But you know, Burmese and all that, they came in kind of a little later at some point too. So there's definitely a potentially Sino-Tibetan or Austro-Asiatic, you know, kind of more Asiatic influence in this area that might be pointing to something like this, you know, some Tibetan or whatnot. Maybe it's up here in the Brahmaputra Valley. I don't know. That one's the most kind of mysterious of them all. Being Shiva associated is definitely interesting though. But yes, considered wet, considered to be stormy in another kind of sense. So that would be all the directions of the Indian deities. There's probably a lot more, but those are the most understandable. And they're great for us to start looking into the Buddhist changes. So some of these are just like slight name changes. So this one I will keep in. Actually, don't make that size. Make it smaller. Data. And then Vaisravana. So Vaisravana is another name for Kubera. They're the same. Vishrava is the parent of Ravana and Vaisravana. And Vais, I think, means the great sun, or famous sun. Yeah. So there's the sun and the famous sun. North. All right, so those are the only two like real changes with the Pali Buddhist, which is still within India Buddhist, and so on. So those are just slight variations. And if I remember correctly, I don't think the colors change. No, yellow. It changes from gold to yellow. And then, oh, yep, they do change. That's right. So Buddhist does take Datta, who used to be yellow in just Vedic sources, and makes him white, which is very interesting. So they clearly see that there's too much overlap, so they take gold and they make it yellow, and they say, well, we can't have two yellow, so they make him white. Interesting, because it fits very nicely into my model, I guess. So this would be, actually, no, not a new one. Just changing this color to white. There. Okay, so that's how we're starting to get Buddhist. Now let's move, and I didn't put Tibetan and Tibetan Buddhist in here yet. It does deserve to be here. I won't do it just yet. Not today. Yeah, right here. Transitional. Variations on the name that could have their own indigenous, like Tibetan origin, I would think. But I'll look into that another time. Feel free to do so yourself. For the Chinese Buddhist, there's a lot of like direct and indirect translations of the Buddhist deities that we just talked about. So Vaisravana becomes Pishamontian and Duowen. Virudhaka becomes Zhang Zhang. Virupaksa becomes Guangmu. Datarata becomes Chi Guo. And Vaisravana, which I already covered. I mean, because Pishamontian, but there's actually another deity in China, Kaishen, that overlaps more with themes of Kubera. So, like, I have, again, my speculative little additional, like, idea. But I'll get into that in a minute. For now, we have direct translations. Pishamontian is still northern. I'll say Buddhist north still, just because in the context over here, I think people understand where this is. Hopefully. Mentian, sorry. North, green. South, blue. West, red. And east, white. So it's keeping east, east, west, west, south, south, north, north. This color is changing to green, which is really interesting for a Buddhist to do. I think the reason they did that is probably because of Huangdi, the green emperor, or sorry, yellow emperor, associated with yellow in China. And since in this layer here, the black emperor, Haidi, is distinguished from him, I think the Buddhists came into China and they saw there was a very important yellow kind of energy figure, and they tweaked it a bit to make it work, even though green and blue are interchangeable in the Chinese system. So if you look down here, the Chinese emperors, and these are their own emperors, their own things. They were most likely pre-Buddhist, most certainly pre-Buddhist, perhaps with some Buddhist influence in their later iconography and colorization and whatnot, but Qingdi is the green-blue or the azure emperor, because azure was like green-blue, teal, basically. So yeah. I will still color these the way that they say they're colored. If they do have a color, I will make it their color. Alright, so blue in the east. Hopefully I'm not spelling stuff too wrong here. H. There it goes again. Not let me click stuff. How rude. Oh. Okay, so he's blue, associated with the south, the wet southern China region. Oops. Guangwu west, Jiguo east. Okay, so my guess on these obviously is clearly they are a direct translation of the Buddhist deities in India, and therefore they're taking from an assumption of Indian climate. What's that? Oh yeah, that'd be nice. Yeah, it's pretty warm in here. Oof. It's very warm today. Let me respond to a few chats. See, you guys are talking in there. Good stuff. Yeah, linguistics is a huge part of what I do all the time. Basically, in order to do mythology research, you have to be interdisciplinary. You have to learn everything. Thank you. Huh? That's enough. Oof. Got some ice here. You're like 1.5 hours behind? Oh, I see. Okay. Fair enough. A study came out shows about 40% of Han Chinese today descend from just 3 male ancestors in the Yellow River Valley. Yeah, so interesting, because yeah, that is the origin. This river right here, this up here, upper river, is the origin of the Han culture language complex, and they became the dominant power in China, basically, even though there are lots of different groups that originally inhabited all these spaces. So a lot of these wind deities, especially the ones that are native to China, they had associations with different tribes, different tribal groups, culture groups, ethno-linguistic groups in China. The Western, well, I guess in this case, I might as well put the most important here. I'll take this gold color. Right here in the middle of the world, of the Han Chinese, that is, this is where the first capitals of China were settled. And they went from the upper into the lower and conquered these peoples, and then they went down here, and so on. But the center of their world would be Huangdi. The Yellow Emperor. And it's yellow because yellow in that sense represents the fertility of in that case, it was millet. I think that was their primary source until later they traded, other wheats, grains and stuff from the west, and then they started to cultivate, rice and things like that from the southern Chinese cultures. But originally, the yellow color is the Yellow River, the silt, the clay. It is a agricultural color in China. Prosperity, gold, and I guess in every culture gold is prosperity and wealth. So anyway, that's the center around which everything else makes sense. So in that case, Guangmu being the west and being fire, I think probably correlates with the Tarim Basin region here and the trade route to the Silk Road, which was a very old road. This is where they most likely got cattle and sheep and grains from the West Asian Neolithic quite early on. Like, they traded all kinds of things there. It was a very active route, you know. And if you hear about the Tocharians, who were an early Indo-European people here, they seem to have been involved with the Xiongnu, which is like a big tribal confederation of many different tribes. There were Turkic, Mongolic, Manchu, and Tocharian, and various other kinds of people that like kind of migrated around the steppe here. So my suspicion is that, of course, here we're talking about Buddhist period, but nonetheless, I feel like the West being fiery, it's associated with these cultures and these regions in this direction. The North, there is literally a Mongolian creator god associated with turtles in the north and such that had been syncretized with one form of this in Buddhist and Chinese here. So it would seem that the northern people, that would be Mongolic, Turkic, and Manchurian. Sometimes in the ethno-linguistic theory is that they were Altaic. Might be what the northern deity is referring to. And then Jiguo, specifically associated with the east in China, is associated with this mountain range right here, especially. I mean, sure, beyond it, but there is a temple to the Eastern Dawn Goddess of China right here on Mount Tai. And yeah, the Eastern deity is associated with Mount Tai in many of these cases. Then the south, there's a whole big complex of deities associated with that. And in this case, Zhangjiang is associated with the south, I think mostly because of Buddhist influence, and it is wet down there, and of course, so it kind of makes sense, it correlates, but typically the south in China, and originally it was associated with fire, not necessarily water or green or any of that type of stuff. So let's populate those. I got Huangdi, and then the Dual Wen is another name. For Pishamentian. However, Dual Wen is syncretized. Pishamentian, not as much, but Dual Wen is syncretized with the Black Emperor. Who is Heidi? Listen, it's Heidi, right? Yes. North. I'll put a picture here. Actually, no, I don't need a picture. I have it. I can explain this very visually without having to explain or say too much. Right here. So we did a lot of Chinese research. Their directions in China are very incredibly important. They have various deities, various beasts that they're associated with. There's the yellow dragon, the Huang Long. Long is dragon, this style of dragon in China. There's the azure dragon and the black tortoise, Xuan Wu, and then the white tiger and the vermilion bird. Each of those is very much correlated with the emperors and their colors, and even the names of the emperors. Sometimes you just take the name of the emperor, the color of the emperor, and put Long at the end, and that's the dragon form of them. So they either have a pet dragon, or creature or beast, or they literally transform into one in some myths. So in this traditional system, the west is white and is associated with white tiger. The east is blue or green, azure, associated with the dragon. Then the vermilion bird, which is a kind of Chinese phoenix, is associated with the south, fire, summer. Then the north actually is associated with a black tortoise. And this tortoise is, I think, more in later depictions, depicted with a serpent on it or with it. So it's like a tortoise and a serpent. And I suspect the serpent aspect might have been, I'm not going to go into this very much, but I suspect it might have been a Siberian, North Asian influenced thing. And that the turtle was more Sino-Tibetan, Chinese, or even Southern Chinese. So anyway, as you can see here, there's many different, like, it's the same colors, the same associations, the same vibes, but all with different kind of switches. These are the Buddhist transformations, these are the local emperors, these are the animals, or I guess these are dragons specifically, and these are the animals. So each of these is associated with a dragon and also an animal of a kind. Now let's actually put them down. Okay. So, like I said, east is not white in the Chinese system. Actually, west is white. And that's Baidi, also called Dijun. Sorry, the White Emperor. And he in this is actually interesting because he almost has a Hyperion thing going on, because he's the father of the sun and the moon, with the solar goddess Shihi. So he is, I almost think of him as like a dawn god, a dusk god. He's very much coded that way, but parent of the sun and moon. Interesting. Yes, okay, so we got the east, actually, not white. But I'm going to say azure, I guess, because if I say green, it's not quite green. If I say blue, it's not quite blue. I don't usually say blue, so azure is just both. And it's interesting because he is more associated with like the wetness, the weather of the East China Sea. So although it is wet down here, that's not the original association. This was the wet region. Because really what you're talking about, that level is a Han Sinitic culture up here, not necessarily down here. Right, it's much later in history that southern China is finally integrated, as little as it is fully integrated even today. So when they're referring to the wet place, it's probably the sea and the weather that comes from there. Then we have the fire down south. GD. Red Emperor, and there's so many names, so I'm not going to bother putting every single name on here. There's Zhurong. And so on. I mean, those are the two most important ones. I think I spelled Baidi wrong. Typical. Yeah. Yandi's a little more obscured, but he's definitely one of them. There's a weird little thing that happens with Shenong, who is basically the farmer god, associated with the south. And then he later takes on, gets syncretized with the Yandi figure, the Chidi Fire Emperor figure, because he's associated with the southern culture, which, you know, is the beginning of rice-based agriculture. And there was, I think, fire, fire cycling, cropping type of stuff that would happen down here. That's why agriculture would be associated with that. But Shenong originally kind of had more like agricultural, less fiery vibes, but over time he got syncretized with the Chidi Red Fire Emperor stuff because he is ancestral to this region. So that's also interesting. The reason I kind of put that over here under chthonic or below is literally just because Yan Luo, which is the imported Buddhist Yama, sounds similar to Yandi, and that was syncretized with him, and Shenong was kind of an agricultural potential green man in the sense of that, but that's a big stretch. I'm just really... That's why a question mark. I mean, I already have an asterisk. A question mark is like really questionable. So, I think I spelled it wrong. Sorry. God. You think Hispania is etymologically linked to the Hesperides? I mean, it would make sense. It is west of Greece and Rome. So we have, I think, everyone represented then. Unless... Let me put this above this. Above to me means older, I guess. Yeah, okay, so the final thing for me to put down in the, oh, yes, I gotta put the animals, then probably Kai Shen. Okay. So this is the reason I put Kai Shen with Huangdi here is because he is associated with gold. He's a fortune god. He is a lot more in alignment with what Huangdi would be in this context. And honestly, a lot more in line with what this Vishrava Kubera vibe would be as well. But because here's what happened with Buddhism, they went and they spread, became that, and that is not a question that is definitive. Datarata, translated literally in the Chi Guo, upholder of the world, basically, I think is what that means. Virupaksa, literally translated into Wangmu, and then Viradhaka into Zangshan. Right, so we have that. Then we have, I think I would put it this way, of them like coming together into this mix. Got this to that. This into that. Yes, so hopefully now you can kind of see there looks like there's an original layer and then there's like an added layer on top that switches things up to be in more alignment with the West for Buddhism, even though it doesn't exactly make all the most sense in its context. Azure Dragon. Now each of these animals is kind of like a super constellation. In Western astrology, or constellations would be made up of these 4 constellations. In China are like made up of many constellations, and each of them is in a quarter of the sky, representing each season. So each of these is also seasonally coded. Of course, the south is summer, north is winter, then the east is autumn, and the west is spring. Or, sorry, the east is spring, the west is autumn. Let me check that. I don't want to get that wrong. Sorry, that's black, no, lighty. Autumn is the west. Okay. So yes, east, spring, west, autumn. The yellow dragon. Also, the Kirin is sometimes considered to be a stand-in for the yellow dragon, as like a symbolic representative, animal representative of Huangdi. by Hu and Zuku. Everyone gets to see how bad I spell things sometimes. Okay, that's Lizard Dragon, Vermilion Bird, Yellow Dragon, White Tiger, and then up here. Black Turtle. Okay. So now you see perhaps some of what I was getting at. I hope someone sees what I'm getting at when I was thinking of Ravana, the dark trickster character, brother of Kubera, having kind of more thematic in line with the actual Chinese deity of the Black Tortoise of the North and the Winter God, as similarly kind of a trickster figure. And this, I'm not going to get into this today by any stretch, but it kind of shares some thematic overlap with the Siberian, North Asian, and Amerindian, Cascadian sort of raven hero or raven god that is like one of the main gods in a lot of Siberian pantheon. It's like the most important one, almost like Odin in a sense, but he has a lot of trickstery sort of. He creates the world in a very tricksy, clever kind of way. So yeah, that's China. And now to wrap up the last 30 minutes, I'd say, of this stream. Thanks for sharing this time with me, everyone, also. But we'll get to another good part. I'll finish with Mesoamerican. I'll try to do Mayan and Aztec, and then we'll wrap up. Because those are the main kind of world parts. We got South Europe, North Europe, India, China, Mesoamerica, right? There are more for sure, and I'll just have to show you in my actual video. But let's see what we have here. So I'm skipping past a few of these slightly different variants of Korean, Japanese renames, basically. With Aztec, we have a northern god associated Tezcatlipoca, and he is black colored, so there's that similar black color of the north, like Chuanwu. Then we have Huitzilopochtli. I'm going to not pronounce these things well at all. South blue is the association. Then Xipitotec, that's east red. And in that case, red is associated with dawn. And so that's something that happens sometimes. Even the Sumerians, one named Ninciana for Inanna, she's a dawn goddess. One of her epithets, Ninciana, means the red goddess, and that's associated with the color of the sky at dawn. And it's in other places, like in Egypt, sometimes that red is associated more with the dusk. But again, Venus is dawn and dusk, really. So in this case, they're looking at that as Eastern coded. Then Quetzalcoatl, don't we all know and love him, actually associated with the west and white as a color, which is quite interesting. Then when you're looking at Mayan, it's different, and I found that curious. So Mayan they're kind of like pillars as well. They're considered upholding the world, a lot more like that Greek and Norse example. These are different animals usually associated. I'll show you what they are. Obviously, Quetzalcoatl is any Quetzal is a serpent. I think Huitzilopochtli is an eagle. But these are pillars or upholders of some kind. The west is black in this case. The south is yellow. The east is red, similarly, so that's in common. And then the north is white. So north white in that sense kind of had more of a snow connotation with the Mayans. So yes, with that, I can get over there, and to avoid having to look back and forth for the spelling, it would be a little faster if I just get these up in my database, plus I can say something about them. Okay. Let's take this one, because it's so similar. So the Mayans, they lived here in the Yucatan and south of it, Guatemala and such. The Aztecs lived up here in the plateau, in Mexico Valley is up here somewhere. So north for them is over here. His animal association was a black jaguar. And I'll put that there because it's kind of nice and memorable. He is a kind of feathered serpent as well, so he's associated with black jaguars, but he's a feathered serpent. I'll just put both as coding. So I think the second one I have a Huitzilopochtli, which is south. South is colored blue. And he is the eagle. Associated with turquoise. So that's the kind of blue that he is, a turquoise. So that's again a kind of a teal, a green blue. So a very similar vibe going on. All three of these are brothers as well. Are children of basically the divine twins. Shipitotec is East Red. East Red's fun. I guess we haven't seen that since maybe Agni, or yeah, no one else is really East Red. Oh, yes. Yeah, he's very interesting. What kind of animal is he associated with? Quails, serpent skins. I'm going to say flayed. I know that's weird. So this is the flayed one. This is the flayed god, which is... He's a very interesting motif, I think. Is that saying that? Okay. He's essentially kind of like a Yama figure. So he's a god that sacrificed himself, flayed himself to provide food for humankind. And so he's got associations with like corn, agriculture, and also red things like pimples. Very interesting character. So this is almost like a dying, resurrecting god, and that's part of why the red color is there. It's more blood oriented, but still the dawn is a factor there. All right, their final is Quetzalcoatl. He's associated with the West, and he is a rainbow serpent, as we know. His color is blue-green. So we got two blue-greens in there. But I guess his technical color... Okay, so he's depicted as blue-green, but like his association color-wise is white. So it's a little complicated, almost like Chigo over there. It's funny because he also has a turquoise association in that blue-green stuff. So like he and the eagle have some story. Now it would make sense if the great serpent and the eagle had some sort of rivalry, because they do in Aztec, the serpent and the eagle. In general, the Aztecs are part of the Nahuan and Uto-Aztecan ethno-linguistic group, which seems to have originated in this region, in Pueblo and southwest area, and they migrated down here, and they ended up, the Aztecs ended up in the Mexico Valley, taking over some of the other Totozoquian and other groups that lived and were native to that region. They were very much identifying with the eagle, which is kind of interesting that they would consider the eagle to be southern, since they themselves identifying with the eagle are northern. And it's also curious that like jaguar, serpent, black would be in the north rather than the south. It almost seems like they're opposite. It's interesting. So yeah, there's one system. Let's look at the Mayan and see how it compares. Sakmi. Let's find these here. They're called the Bacabs. 4 directions. They're brothers. Just the same. Children of also kind of twins. So the most similar one would be East Hobnil. who is also red. He's associated with kind of abundance, wealth, and harvest, so he's very much that kind of fertility thing, which, yeah, that's correlating with the Zipic Totec, because he's afraid one, father of agriculture, because of his sacrifice. So that would be the commonality there between those, aside from the fact that they're both red and both east. Hi, Kate. Wow. Yes, you have something to add? Okay, yeah. I need to get some more colors from here, probably. Come sit. Yeah, come sit. I know it's warm. Right north. This is the one that the north was actually white. And let's see. He is snow. Which is kind of interesting, because if you're in the Yucatan, there's not too many times that you're going to be getting snow from up here. I almost wonder if it's referring to further north, some ancestral memory or something. But as someone was saying about Florida getting cold days, it could probably happen. I think it does snow sometimes, but seriously doubt it. And then south. We got a new color, at least over there, yellow. He is the storm and rain god. So this is yellow being associated with storm and rain. Perhaps the lightning aspect or something, but it could also be the fertility southern sort of idea. Maize, after all, sometimes is yellow. And then black is actually west. And he's a jaguar. So we're seeing these together. We got snow in the north, storm and rain in the south, black jaguar in the west, and kind of harvest in the east. So one would think, because yes, the Mayans were here before the Aztecs came here, if there was an influence, it would be in this direction. This one is pretty clear, right? This one also thematically lines up. It's an agricultural deity. This one maybe doesn't as much. It's a little bit of a stretch. But it's not outside the wheel of possibility. And then the eagle seems to be a totally alien or separate thing. Now, the question would be if the storm god was associated with eagle or maybe a thunderbird, because this is a very much Amerindian thunderbird is a thing. Technically, the Sumerians had Anzu, or the Akkadian Sumerians had Anzu, and he was a thunderbird too. So the world does have them. But I kind of want to look up right now if there's any eagle connotations with Hosanna. Yeah, yep. Okay. So purportedly, Holsanek is literally associated with thunderbirds. See, I told you it's like puzzles. It's like, that would make sense. Then that in that case does very much smell like it's related. So if there's an eagle or a storm, even Zeus has an eagle, and there's old precedents for that. Even Thiassi in Norse is like a giant thunderbird trickster god. So since there's so much correlation with those, I would wonder if that stands out at all. So my hunch, and I'm not going to necessarily look into this because this is a little bit more complicated question. Thunderbird is an easy connection. This, I think, the pattern I picked up on is Quetzalcoatl has some potentially Mercurian aspects to him. Certainly his servant of kinds, Kukulkan in Mayan, which is obviously Quetzalcoatl's name is Ihikatl, I think, or let me look at this. No. Perhaps this is the way to think of it too, because there is a Quetzalcoatl in Mayan that's fairly identical. And that's Cucumatz. So something I'll put here actually is Cucumatz. It's very similar. Let me ask here, if he has a color specifically. clouds and wind carrying the sun in the east. So he actually, in Mayan, is associated with the west. And blue and green, so blue-green, so we got that color. So that's kind of where that was coming in when I was looking at it, of like Quetzalcoatl's coloring. In Mayan, he's not white. Sky and water and vegetation and rain, these are often associated. And so he's got that blue-green motif to him. Oops, I did the wrong thing again. Okay. So that's another one that symbolically would seem to go with that, especially since the hero who is devoured by Quetzalcoatl, aka Cucumatz, becomes kind of the cultural hero of the Mayans or the Aztecs respectively. That's Kukulkan in Mayan and Ixicatl in Aztec. The motifs are so similar that there does seem to be some inheritance going on, and probably not directly through Mayan, but probably through some of the intermediary Totozoquian or other Mesoamerican cultures, all stemming ultimately from a Mesoamerican, probably Neolithic, you know, corn, maize, agriculture, and the spread of that. So, yeah, it would seem that the Aztecs came down here and they adopted a lot of these from the Mayans. That would be my suspicion. This is still an interesting mystery, especially since up here in the Aztec source, he is more associated with winter and cold, despite the jaguar being west in here, and then, you know, Quetzalcoatl being west as well as the jaguar. It's interesting. It's interesting how it kind of points in that direction of relatively that is all west from the Aztecs, so it kind of works with my theory. But at that, we have a pretty interesting situation. Quite a lot of ideas here. I'm going to draw this little line here for myself. Yeah. Any final questions before we head off here? Was this helpful? Was this interesting? Feel free to explore it. Leave some comments once this video goes off live and explore these motifs. I definitely have other things that I will be filling out in here before the video comes out with some variants of the name, and especially some Iroquois, Anishinaabe, Lakota, and even Egyptian kind of stuff. I'll read the comments here quick, if there are any for me. And I do keep the chats visible afterwards. They shouldn't disappear when the video ends, so you should be able to continue your conversation, or at least retain your conversation if you're talking to each other in there. We're talking about plants, we're talking about... Okay, climate. Yeah, there's a lot of talking about orienting toward the east in certain ways. I know that there's different prayer traditions. When calling corners, they might start or orient in a particular direction. I know for the Etruscans, they actually oriented towards the south. So you would face the south, and then they would beseech each of the winds as kind of messengers. And that was, I think, when they were doing haruspice, or maybe they were just eagle bird interpretation, whichever one that is. They would orient towards the south in order to read bird movements. And so there are a lot of different cultures that do maybe different directions that they orient towards. And east sometimes is one of them. Okay. Yep, the Japanese in the Far East, the rising sun being red is very much that dawn code going on. And yes, I mean, in general, East is associated with like birth and beginnings and kind of goodness and light. The West is associated with death and darkness and elderhood, all these things. Because the sun is born and then dies in the West. Born in the East, dies in the West. There are many different stories where the psychopomp who takes souls in and out of the underworld, they might take souls out of the underworld at dawn. I think that's what the pelican or the stork does, symbolically. And then at dusk, it's a vulture carrying off, feeding off the dead in Egypt and other places. I learned even in Etruscan that the Etruscan Karen is a vulture hybrid. So they had a little bit more of that, probably Neolithic vulture death association going on. There's also Anzu and the eagle stuff, Thunderbird stuff I was talking about. There's some potential correlation in West Asia with vultures being the great bird rather than eagles, and sometimes even eagles being conflated with vultures. It's easy to do so. Sometimes when you see a vulture, it looks like an eagle until you get closer, and you're like, oh gosh. So, you like my Ishtar Mithra videos? Thanks. I work pretty hard on those. I'm trying to work on more of those types of things. I was kind of just really interested in the four winds these past few weeks, and so that's what I've been preparing to do next. It's a little bit different, showing kind of the directions in each relative place, kind of fun. Egypt has the 3 suns. I'll have to look into that. I know that they do have directional stuff. But it's not very strong. They do have a directional, the Sons of Horus seems to be maybe a later thing. But there are definitely meaningful correlations going on, and they do have colors associated with them. Red, yellow. I don't know why it said south twice. That's green, I think. And white. So yes, this is what we have. I'll leave. It's hard to kind of see those, but I can leave the video on this. And I could pause and look at this cheat sheet. Egypt cared about north-south, but also east-west, though, too, because of the birth and death thing, and also because there's a lot of travel going on. From eastward is Asia, and west is the Sahara. So thanks everyone for joining me. You can leave some more comments down on the video once it's done being live, but I've done a 3-hour stream. That is plenty. That's 1 more hour I think than I planned to do, but it's a lot of stuff to go through. So thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time in the next video. Bye.